On June 2006, employees of a Burger King in the small town of Brunswick, Georgia, were just trying to get through their shift like any other. But that all changed when they found an unconscious man slumped over behind their dumpster. Had he stayed there much longer, it's unlikely he would have survived. But as the paramedics loaded him onto the stretcher, one of them asked him. All they were left with was a social security card in his name, Benjamin Kyle, but no record of him anywhere. They tried contacting anyone who might have known him under that name, but it was as if he'd vanished into thin air. There were no addresses linked to him, and no friends or family stepped forward to claim him. His entire past had been wiped clean, and no one knew why. So he spent his days watching TV, eating lunch in the hospital cafeteria, and walking its halls until finally a breakthrough occurred. This seemed to be the closest match they had, but he'd already been dead for 30 years. "Who are you?" He looked at them confused and simply replied, "I don't know." She couldn't quite place him either, but the image stuck in her mind. Then several months later, while looking through some old photo albums, she saw a familiar face. He told them, "I remember little things, but I can't put it together. I'm like a jigsaw puzzle that's missing 30 years. Something had caused his memory loss." But what? He had shown signs of amnesia before. 5 years prior to his hospitalization, he'd checked himself into a mental health facility, saying he couldn't remember anything. But then, just as quickly as he'd forgotten everything, his memories returned, and he left the facility. She called up her friend immediately, saying, "I think I found him." So while the case was officially closed, everyone was still wondering what really happened to him. After getting it towed to a mechanic shop, he never picked it up, and no one heard from him again. Now, finally, his family had answers. His brother said, "We now know that he has a medical condition that comes and goes. That's our working theory anyway. So it seems unlikely he'd have taken such good care of himself out on the street." Elizabeth had come across a picture of her son's former elementary school teacher. She showed the photo to the nurse, who was certain. "That's him. That's the guy." If he'd been homeless for years, it was unlikely he'd managed to stay so clean-cut. His hair was neatly trimmed, his nails were manicured, and he was wearing a jacket and tie, despite being barefoot. Police were puzzled by the fact that Benjamin had no money or credit cards, but he had a key on a lanyard around his neck. He couldn't remember what it unlocked, but it was odd that he'd been carrying it around for all those years. The Social Security Administration confirmed Benjamin's birth year as 1949. Yet he appeared to be more than 30 years younger. When the police searched him, they also found a bus ticket with the name John Davis printed on it and nothing else. He told them he'd grown up in Jacksonville, Florida, and that he remembered Benjamin as a popular young man in high school. The man found in Georgia wasn't Benjamin Kyle at all, but William Burgess Powell. But that wasn't the only shocking discovery. It turns out he'd been missing since 1976, having vanished without a trace exactly 30 years before he was found. To their surprise, however, they were greeted by Benjamin himself. Confused by their presence, he invited them in, and they showed him the newspaper article describing the mysterious amnesiac man. He was good at sports, especially baseball, and everyone knew him as a kind and friendly guy. After a DNA test confirmed he was indeed the missing man, the media went wild. Here was the answer they'd all been waiting for, but it raised more questions than it answered. How did he survive for so long without anyone knowing? Where had he been all that time? Why had he forgotten everything about himself? How did he end up unconscious behind a Burger King dumpster? But tragically, he'd always struggled with alcohol abuse. It was then the medics noticed he wasn't wearing shoes or a shirt. His clothes were dirty, torn, and had no identifying marks. And his only form of ID was a social security card bearing the name Benjamin Kyle. They called 911, and he was soon rushed to the nearest hospital. The man was incredibly lucky to have been discovered when he was. When the man regained consciousness in the hospital, doctors asked him questions to try and jog his memory. "What's your name? Where do you live? What's your date of birth?" But he had no answers. In 2007, the National Center for Missing Adults released a composite sketch hoping someone would recognize him. And in 2008, Dr. Phil McGrath offered a reward of $100,000 for any information leading to his identification. Still, no one came forward. The man didn't even know what state he was in, let alone who he was. At that point, doctors diagnosed him with retrograde amnesia, which is thankfully rare but not unheard of. After running blood tests and scans, Doctors cleared him of any physical injuries and determined he was mentally competent, just without any memory of his past. But that wasn't the only thing that was confusing. As time passed, his story began to attract national attention. It was like Benjamin had lived an entire life under a rock. A nurse who worked in the pediatric ward recognized him from the composite sketch and mentioned it to her friend, Elizabeth Poles. With this new lead, police conducted another round of background checks and learned the teacher's name was Benjamin Kyle, born in the same year the amnesiac man was. Then in 2014, a man contacted the police, claiming he knew Benjamin. Police visited the home where he grew up, but it was a long shot. After all, it had been so many years. "That's me," he said. "You found me." Benjamin was incredibly happy to find his family. But when they asked him about his memories, he confessed that he still couldn't remember anything. His sister, Diana Russell, said that despite his lack of memories, he was doing well overall and had begun working as a cook at the Cracker Barrel in Brunswick. After all, it's not like he woke up one morning and forgot who he was. But something else didn't add up either. When Benjamin was found behind the dumpster, he was covered in dirt, and his clothes were ripped and muddy. Even stranger, Benjamin hadn't bathed for so long that the hospital staff joked he smelled like stale urine. Yet this wasn't the only clue. Then came the first major break in the case. Genealogical DNA testing uncovered the truth. He'd been living in Jacksonville, Florida, when his car broke down on the side of the road. So while he may have been found, the world still doesn't know what happened to him during those missing 30 years, and it's likely we never will. Now you need to watch Most Wanted, America's deadliest serial killer still on the loose. Or have a look at this.